What happened when my husband took our kids to Dubai for my birthday? His regret will leave you speechless. Welcome to Stories TH. In today's video, we are diving deep into a real-life story of betrayal, revenge, and justice. You won't believe the shocking twist that happened when a cheating husband is caught red-handed. Make sure you stay till the end to see the ultimate turn of events. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Stories TH for more true and inspiring stories. Your support helps us keep these stories coming. As Lena approached her 40th birthday, the excitement and anticipation surrounding the milestone were palpable. For an entire week, her husband, Eric, had been teasing her with cryptic comments, whispering in her ear each morning before leaving for work. "Your gift will blow your mind." The playful hints only fueled her curiosity, leaving her wondering just what he had planned. He seemed unusually affectionate, showering her with little gestures of affection, a kiss on the cheek as he left for the office, an unexpected text message during the day just to tell her he loved her, and promises of a perfect evening. He spoke with a sense of pride, like he was in on a secret he couldn't wait to reveal. She couldn't help but feel the bubbling excitement as her birthday drew closer. She was about to reach a milestone in her life, one that marked the end of her 30s and the beginning of a new decade, a time for reflection and new beginnings. The idea that Eric had something grand planned added to the allure, making it feel like this would be a special birthday. A blow-your-mind gift, as he promised, sounded intriguing, maybe something extravagant, a romantic gesture to mark their years together. Lena tried not to let her mind wander too much into what the gift might be. But as the days passed, she couldn't help herself. Was it a weekend getaway? A piece of jewelry she'd been eyeing for years? Or maybe something unexpected, something that would speak to the love and connection they had built over their time together. After all, they had been married for 17 years, college sweethearts who had built a life together through mutual support and shared dreams. Eric had been her partner through everything, his rise through the corporate ranks, her decision to pause her legal career to focus on their family, the sacrifices and compromises they had made for the sake of their children, Emma and Jake. Each year, their marriage had weathered challenges, but had also been a foundation of love and companionship. Her birthday, Lena hoped, would serve as a reminder of their bond, a celebration of all they had accomplished together. But as she awoke on the morning of her 40th birthday, the excitement and anticipation quickly turned to confusion. The house was eerily silent, too silent. There was no sound of the kids arguing or the usual morning hustle. There was no smell of Caleb's coffee brewing or the birthday breakfast he had promised. She called out for Eric, but there was no response. As she moved through the house, a sense of unease began to creep in. The silence felt too loud, almost as if it was mocking her expectations. Her legs carried her to her children's rooms, and to her shock, their beds were made and their closets empty. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Her family was gone. Her mind raced as she hurried down the stairs, calling their names with growing urgency. No answer. She stumbled into the kitchen, searching for answers. The house was perfectly still, as if everything had been frozen in time. A small part of her hoped that this was just some elaborate surprise, a setup for the grand gift Eric had been teasing her about. But as she opened the refrigerator and found ingredients for breakfast, untouched fresh strawberries, cream cheese, and the bio bread, she loved the sinking feeling in her stomach grew. Her heart raced as she scanned the space, her eyes landing on the missing toothbrushes and luggage, evidence that her family had left without her. The birthday that was supposed to be filled with laughter and love had started to unravel into something unrecognizable. Lena grabbed her phone and texted Eric, hoping for an explanation. Her message was delivered, but there was no response. A sense of panic slowly began to take over. She tried texting Emma and Jake, but there was no reply. Her fingers trembled as she opened Instagram, hoping to find some clue that might explain what was happening. And then, the reality hit her like a slap in the face. The post from Emma on Instagram, her daughter's smiling face beside Eric and Jake at a luxury resort in Dubai, was not the surprise she had expected. The caption, "Daddy's treating us since mom's boring anyway," crushed what was left of her composure. The words stung like 1,000 needles, and her heart shattered in an instant. She had been excluded, abandoned on her 40th birthday, with no explanation, no warning. In that moment, the flood of emotions overwhelmed her: betrayal, confusion, disbelief, and an unrelenting sense of loss. Her world, which had once felt secure and predictable, was now a broken illusion. The man she had trusted, the man she had built a life with, had taken her for granted in the most painful way possible. It wasn't just the fact that they were gone, it was the deliberate exclusion, the message that she was boring, that cut to the core. Lena had spent years supporting Eric's career, managing the household, and raising their children. She had put her dreams on hold to make sure their family was stable, and now she felt like she had been thrown aside, discarded like a piece of furniture. Her first instinct was to react, perhaps to call them, to beg them to come back, to make sense of the betrayal. But she didn't. Instead, she moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects as if confirming they were real. The photographs on the walls, the family mementos that had once meant so much to her, now mocked her. She thought about the years she had spent building their life together, the vacations, the anniversaries, the love she had poured into their marriage. And yet, in a single moment, it felt like it had all been a lie. The mask of the perfect family had crumbled, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. But the realization, as painful as it was, brought with it a strange clarity. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to beg. Instead, Lena chose to take control. As she scrolled through more photos of her family enjoying their luxurious vacation, she found herself smiling not out of spite, but because she knew she had something they didn't. Justice. The day she had always dreaded was now the day she would reclaim her life. What Eric had thought would be his grand surprise for Lena had instead become her turning point, her moment of empowerment. Lena woke up that morning expecting the familiar bustle of a birthday, filled with joy, laughter, and the warmth of her family. But as her eyes fluttered open, something felt different. The usual sounds were absent. There was no chorus of her kids' voices echoing through the house, no loud arguments about who would get the last slice of toast, and certainly no smell of the breakfast she'd been promised. The house was completely silent, eerily silent. The quiet seemed to stretch on endlessly, filling the space around her in a way that felt unsettling rather than peaceful. The emptiness she felt inside mirrored the emptiness around her. She lay there for a moment, trying to process what was happening. Was she still dreaming? The bedroom, once a sanctuary of warmth, now felt cold and hollow. The sound of her husband, Eric, snoring beside her was absent too. His side of the bed, once warm and inviting, was empty, the sheets still neatly tucked. No movement, no sign of life. Confusion began to seep into her thoughts. She glanced at the clock, 9:15 a.m. She had expected to hear the kids waking up, the typical hum of the morning routine. At least, that was the hope she'd clung to as she drifted off to sleep the night before, imagining a birthday breakfast full of pancakes and laughter. But now, the house felt like a ghost of what it should have been, a place where nothing seemed real. She stretched out her hand to Eric's side of the bed, instinctively reaching for him, only to find that it was cold. She pulled herself up, noticing the heaviness in her chest. Something wasn't right. "Eric," she called out, her voice thick with confusion. Her voice echoed back to her, the sound bouncing off the empty walls. No response. Her mind raced. Maybe he was in the kitchen preparing her birthday breakfast like he always did, the smell of bacon and eggs mingling with the faint scent of coffee. But as she stepped out of bed and padded through the hallway, she realized that the house was completely still. She called for the kids, Emma and Jake, but there was no answer. The sound of their footsteps, those familiar, rush sounds of teenagers getting ready, was missing. With growing concern, Lena made her way down the hall, reaching Emma's room first. The door was cracked open, and Lena stepped inside to find the bed perfectly made, the kind of tidy she never would have expected from her daughter, who was usually a little more chaotic in the mornings. The empty room only added to the confusion gnawing at her mind. She glanced at the closet, but it was eerily devoid of clothes. Emma's favorite boots, the ones she had left by the door the night before, were gone. Jake's room was no different. His bed was also made, the way it never was unless something had forced him to get up early and leave. Her pulse quickened as she raced downstairs, calling out for her family, a rising panic in her chest. "Emma? Jake?" She was met with nothing but the sound of her own voice bouncing back at her, echoing in the emptiness. She entered the kitchen, hoping to find anything that might explain what was going on. But there was no sign of life. The kitchen was pristine, as if no one had touched it. The fridge was full, but nothing had been prepared for breakfast. She stared blankly at the ingredients Eric had bought just the day before: the fresh strawberries, the cream cheese, the special bread she loved. Everything was untouched, still in its packaging, as if they hadn't even bothered to get the breakfast started. She opened the pantry, half hoping to find something that would explain the strange silence, but there was nothing. The kitchen that had once been full of life now felt empty and cold. A chill ran down her spine. It was as if the whole house had been frozen in time. Lena's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. She opened the fridge and glanced at the neatly packed rows of vegetables, the fresh eggs she had planned to use for the omelet she'd been craving. Nothing had been disturbed. Not even the coffee pot on the counter was left on, which was unusual for Eric, who always brewed coffee first thing. Her heart started to pound in her chest as she began to process the unsettling silence. What was happening? Where was everyone? She rushed to the bathroom, and, as she suspected, it was there that the final confirmation of her growing suspicion lay. The toothbrushes, hers, Eric's, and the kids' were all gone. Luggage was missing, too, the bags that had been sitting in the hall closet for weeks, waiting for a family trip that now seemed impossible. In a panic, Lena grabbed her phone from the counter, hoping to hear a message from Eric or the kids explaining everything away. Maybe they had gone out for a surprise breakfast or were planning something for her birthday. But there was nothing. No message, no missed calls. Her hands shook as she unlocked her phone and texted Eric. "Where are you guys?" The message delivered, but there was no reply. She sent another message, this time to Emma. "Honey, where did everyone go?" Again, no response. The absence of answers only added to the creeping fear in her chest. She opened Instagram, hoping to see something that might clarify what was going on. But as her thumb scrolled, her breath caught. There it was. Emma's latest post, a picture of her, Eric, and Jake, all standing together by an infinity pool with an incredible view. The caption, "Daddy's treating us since mom's boring," hung like a cruel joke in the air. Lena stood frozen, staring at the screen as her entire world seemed to collapse. The words "Daddy's treating us since mom's boring" felt like a slap to the face. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the puzzle of the morning. This wasn't just an accidental misunderstanding. This wasn't some planned surprise or last-minute family trip. This was a deliberate act, a betrayal. Her family had abandoned her on her 40th birthday, and there was no explanation, no apology, nothing. She scrolled through the Instagram post again, the perfect family photos mocking her with every passing second. They were having fun without her. They had planned this trip, and somehow, Lena had been the last to know. The house, once filled with laughter, now felt empty and cold. The silence that had greeted her that morning had become deafening. It wasn't just the absence of her family, it was the absence of any explanation, any compassion. And as Lena stood there, staring at the phone in her trembling hands, she realized that everything had changed. The life she had known, the life she had built with Eric, had been shattered in an instant. Lena's hand trembled as she unlocked her phone, hoping to find an explanation for the morning's chaos, some text or missed call that would clear up the confusion. But as she opened Instagram, the first thing that greeted her was a post from Emma. Her daughter, always active on social media, had just uploaded a news story. Lena's eyes quickly scanned the image, a picture-perfect shot of Eric, Emma, and Jake standing together beside an infinity pool, their smiles bright against the backdrop of a lavish resort. It was a stunning picture, capturing what seemed to be the epitome of a perfect family vacation. The caption, however, stopped her heart cold. "Daddy's treating us since mom's boring." The words felt like a physical blow, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. Lena's stomach twisted as she reread the post, the words sinking in with a heaviness she couldn't shake. Her daughter's voice echoed in her mind, the casual cruelty of the caption making her feel small and insignificant. "Daddy's treating us since Mom's boring." It was a stab in the back, a blatant dismissal of everything she had worked for, everything she had given to this family. A surge of betrayal flooded through her chest. Her mind screamed at her to make sense of it, to understand how this could happen, but there was no explanation that could undo the damage. Lena had been left behind. She was the one who had spent the last 17 years of her life supporting Eric's career, raising their children, and building a home. She had sacrificed her own ambitions to keep the family running smoothly. She put her legal career on hold to be a mother, a wife, a homemaker, a cheerleader for everyone else. And this was her reward? Her family, the people she loved and trusted more than anyone else in the world, had decided that she was no longer worth celebrating. They had gone to Dubai without her, left her to fend for herself on her birthday, and all the while, they were living it up in luxury, flaunting their vacation like it was the greatest gift they could give themselves. The anger that began to rise within Lena was like nothing she had ever felt before. It was a fierce, raw emotion that cut through her despair like a knife. It was anger not just at Eric, but at the entire situation, at the years she had spent working herself into the ground, only to be cast aside in favor of something or someone else. At the betrayal that now seemed to permeate everything around her, from her daughter's callous Instagram post to the sudden emptiness of her house. The silence that had greeted her this morning was deafening in hindsight. It wasn't just the absence of her family. It was the absence of love, of respect. Lena's thumb hovered over her phone screen, the truth sinking in deeper with each passing second. She scrolled through more of Emma's photos, each one reinforcing the lie, each one adding weight to the crushing realization that she had been lied to, discarded, and manipulated. "Daddy's treating us since Mom's boring." It wasn't just a post. It was a declaration. It was a statement of how little she meant to them. It was proof of how her role in the family had been minimized, how she had become nothing more than an afterthought. She wasn't just left behind physically. She had been erased from their narrative. They didn't just leave her in the dust. They actively turned away from her, creating a new story where she didn't fit. Her fingers curled into fists, the phone slipping from her hand onto the counter as she struggled to contain the fury welling up inside her. Her breath quickened, her heart racing as the betrayal became clearer, sharper. The anger was almost suffocating, but it was also liberating in a way. For the first time in years, she wasn't just passive in the face of Eric's manipulation. She wasn't going to pretend that everything was okay. She wasn't going to play the role of the forgiving, understanding wife anymore. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a violation of everything she had given, everything she had sacrificed. She could feel her body trembling with rage, her face flushing as the truth settled in, clear as day. Eric had made his choice. He had chosen Vanessa. He had chosen a life of luxury, a life where he could discard Lena, his wife, without a second thought. It was like the veil had been lifted, and all the signs she had ignored over the years, the late nights at work, the suspicious excuses, the distant behavior came rushing back to her. This wasn't just about a spontaneous vacation. This was part of a pattern of lies, of emotional manipulation that had been building for months, if not years. Lena's mind raced as she replayed the events of the morning, the silence, the emptiness, the cold realization that her family had intentionally left her out of their lives. She had been so focused on the idea of a surprise, a grand gift from Eric, that she hadn't seen the truth staring her in the face. The betrayal was so simple, so calculated. They didn't just leave her behind physically. They left her behind emotionally, too. They had removed her from their story entirely. The anger she felt now wasn't just directed at Eric. It was directed at herself, too. Why had she allowed herself to be so invisible? Why had she let Eric manipulate her into believing that everything was fine, that their marriage was strong? Why had she ignored the small signs, the little things that didn't quite add up, convincing herself that everything would be okay? Lena had spent so much time focused on supporting Eric, on being the perfect wife and mother, that she had forgotten to take care of herself. She had forgotten to demand respect, to assert her own needs and desires. As the minutes ticked by, the anger inside her began to crystallize into something more focused resolve. She wasn't going to let this betrayal define her. She wasn't going to sit idly by while Eric and his new life unfolded without her. She wasn't just going to take the blow and move on, pretending that everything would be fine. No, she was done. She was done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with the idea that she had to be the one to sacrifice everything for everyone else. Lena's thumb hovered over her phone again, but this time, it wasn't to scroll through more of Emma's posts. It was to take action. The anger, though raw and intense, was a driving force. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. She had spent so long living in the shadow of Eric's success, his desires, and his needs that she had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. But now, with the betrayal laid out so plainly in front of her, Lena knew exactly what she needed to do. She wasn't just going to let this slide. She was going to take control of the situation, take control of her life. And the first step was to expose the truth. The anger that had consumed her moments ago was still there, but now it was tempered with something else: strength. Lena's fingers trembled as she frantically scrolled through her phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She had already sent multiple messages to Caleb and the kids, trying to make sense of the morning's complete chaos. With each unanswered call, with each read message that went ignored, the dread inside her deepened. She wasn't used to being ignored by her family, but this felt different. This wasn't just silence, it was deliberate. They weren't responding. They had planned this without her. It hit her then, the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just a surprise vacation, a missed birthday breakfast, or a broken promise. This was a betrayal. With each passing minute, the emptiness of the house grew more suffocating, more alien. The house that had once been filled with the sounds of her children's laughter and Caleb's voice now felt like a cavernous, hollow space. The silence weighed on her like a physical presence, filling every room, every corner, every crevice where love and warmth had once lived. It was as if she had been erased from their lives, without warning, without explanation. No note, no message, no trace of care from the people she had spent years raising, supporting, loving. She looked at the Instagram post from Emma again, her heart lurching with each word, each image, each casual dismissal of her role in their family. "Daddy's treating us since Mom's boring." The words seemed to echo in her mind, over and over, growing louder with each repetition. Boring. It felt like a slap across her face, a verbal declaration that she was no longer needed, no longer wanted. How could they think this of her? How could her daughter, her own flesh and blood, be so casually cruel? And Caleb, her husband of 17 years, the man she had given everything to, how could he just go along with this? How had he reduced her to nothing more than a shadow in her own home? Lena felt the sharp sting of humiliation creep through her. But it wasn't just humiliation, it was fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize that you are being erased from the very life you built. She wasn't just being left out of a birthday celebration. She was being abandoned, sidelined in the family she had sacrificed so much to build. It was a fear she had never experienced before, not with her family. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of everything she had been to them. The mother, the wife, the one who had always put everyone else first. She had been the glue that held them together, and now it felt like they were all peeling away from her, leaving her behind in the dust. As she stared at her phone, the reality of what was happening settled in. They hadn't just gone on vacation, they had planned this behind her back. Caleb had orchestrated this entire escape without even consulting her, without even considering her feelings. The kids, too, had been in on it. They had been complicit in this decision to exclude her, to leave her behind. The words of Emma's post, "Mom's boring," cut deeper than anything else. They weren't just saying she was uninteresting. They were saying she didn't matter. She was invisible. The fear began to settle into a hollow pit in her stomach. She couldn't understand how they could treat her like this. She had been there for them through everything: the late nights with sick kids, the endless days of packing lunches and running errands, the sacrifices of her own career to keep their lives running smoothly. She had given them everything. And yet, here she was alone in the house, feeling like a stranger to the family she had built from the ground up. The thought that her own children could have so easily turned their backs on her, was almost too much to bear. Lena couldn't stop the tears that began to sting her eyes as she thought of all the ways she had tried to make their family life work. She had compromised so much, put her own dreams and aspirations on hold for the sake of her family. And now, it felt like all of that had been for nothing. As much as she loved them, as much as she had given, they had turned away. She was nothing more than a forgotten afterthought in their new life, one they had chosen without her. It was like she didn't even exist in their world anymore. She shook her head, trying to clear the confusion that clouded her mind. This couldn't be real. This wasn't the family she had known. But the more she looked around the empty house, the more the reality set in. There were no signs of the life she had built. No sign of Caleb's mess on the kitchen counter, no dirty socks from Jake by the front door, no music playing from Emma's room. Just emptiness. Cold, deafening silence. Lena's phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another WhatsApp message from Caleb. She stared at the notification for a moment, the fear crawling up her spine. She couldn't bring herself to open it. The last thing she needed was more empty excuses, more lies about how this wasn't his fault, how it was all just a misunderstanding. The truth was clear enough now. The truth had been clear the moment she saw Emma's post. This wasn't just a spontaneous trip. It wasn't just a surprise vacation. This was deliberate. This was calculated. And she was the one left to pick up the pieces. Her thumb hovered over the phone, but she couldn't bring herself to open the message. Instead, she turned away, sitting down heavily on the couch. Her thoughts spun in circles, each one more painful than the last. She had always prided herself on being the strong one, the one who held everything together, the one who made sacrifices for the sake of her family. But now, she was the one who had been abandoned. She was the one who was left in the wake of their selfishness, their disregard for her. And in the quiet of her empty house, Lena felt something she had never felt before: invisible. She had been erased from their lives, cast aside without a second thought. She had been so focused on keeping everyone else's life on track that she had forgotten to protect herself, to demand the respect she deserved. The loneliness settled over her like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just the emptiness of the house, it was the emptiness in her heart. The fear that this was the new normal, that this was how her family saw her now. Invisible, forgotten, alone. Lena felt like she was in a haze, moving through the motions of the day while her mind raced in 1,000 different directions. The realization that her family had planned this betrayal behind her back was still sinking in. But amidst the shock and the overwhelming sense of abandonment, a flicker of determination began to burn within her. She couldn't just sit there, powerless and silent. She needed answers. She needed the truth. As she stood in the middle of her empty house, the familiar surroundings now feeling like a cold, foreign space, Lena made up her mind. She couldn't let Caleb get away with this, not after everything they had built together. She had to know how deep this betrayal ran, how much of their life had been built on lies. Without thinking, she made her way to Caleb's home office, the one place in the house that she had never really felt the need to explore. It had always been his domain, his space, his work. But now, in the midst of everything that had happened, it felt like the only place left to find answers. The door creaked open, and Lena stepped inside, her heart racing as she took in a sight of the room that had once been full of Caleb's work-related clutter. Now, it felt ominously still. The polished wood desk, the leather chair, the framed awards on the walls, they were all symbols of the life they had created together, the life she had supported and nurtured. But now, the room was just a reminder of how little she truly knew about Caleb. She had always trusted him, trusted their relationship, their marriage. But now, standing here, she realized that trust had been broken in the most insidious of ways. Lena's hands trembled as she moved to his desk, her fingers brushing over the surface of the drawer. She knew Caleb well enough to know where he kept his things. With a quick, almost automatic motion, she pulled the drawer open, finding it locked, just as she had expected. She didn't hesitate. She knew exactly where the key was hidden. Beneath the desk, taped to the underside, was a small, cold metal key. With it in hand, she unlocked the drawer and opened it slowly. The first thing that caught her eye was a stack of credit card statements. Her heart sank as she flipped through them, seeing charges she hadn't authorized. Jewelry, expensive dinners, hotel bookings at places she had never been. Every page seemed to confirm what she had already suspected: Caleb had been hiding something, and it wasn't just a few careless oversights. This was planned. This was intentional. Lena's mind raced as she continued to sift through the papers. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. There were flight bookings for a trip to Dubai, the same city Emma had posted about on Instagram. She recognized the dates immediately. This wasn't just some random getaway. This was a meticulously planned trip, one that Caleb had orchestrated with someone else. But it wasn't just the flights that made her heart stop. There were hotel bookings, too. The kind of luxury accommodations that Caleb had always told her they couldn't afford. But now, here they were, all paid for with their joint credit card, without her knowledge or consent. The charges were undeniable. And then, buried at the bottom of the drawer, she found it. A burner phone, the kind of phone that Caleb had never mentioned, never once acknowledged. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, the weight of it feeling like 1,000 pounds in her hand. She turned the phone on, half expecting it to be password protected. But Caleb had been careless. He hadn't bothered to lock it. The screen lit up, and Lena's stomach dropped as she scrolled through the messages. They were from Vanessa Jenkins, Caleb's executive assistant, the same woman who had been so eager to please him at company events. The messages were filled with flirtations, plans for late-night meetings, and intimate conversations about their time together. "Can't wait for Thursday night," one message read. "Same time, same place." Where that red thing. Another one read, "Dubai will be amazing. He has no idea. Told the kids it's a special trip just for them." Her mind swirled with disbelief. How long had this been going on? How many lies had Caleb told her? And how many times had she believed them? Lena's breath caught in her throat as she scrolled further. The truth was right in front of her, undeniable, irrefutable. Caleb had been seeing Vanessa for months. And not only that, but he had been using their shared resources, their family funds, to finance his affair. The luxury dinners, the trips, the gifts, all paid for with the money she had helped earn. It was as if everything she had done for their family, everything she had worked so hard for, had been used against her without her even knowing it. But in that moment, as the weight of the betrayal finally settled in, Lena felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just hurt. It was clarity. The pieces had fallen into place, and she now had everything she needed: evidence, proof, and a plan. The emotional turmoil that had been clouding her mind for days was replaced by a cool, calm sense of determination. She wasn't going to let Caleb get away with this. She wasn't going to let him destroy her any longer. Lena closed the burner phone and set it down gently on the desk. Her hands, though still shaking, were now steady. She had everything she needed to make sure Caleb would never again take her for granted. The thought of confronting him, of showing him what she had uncovered, sent a rush of empowerment through her. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt in control. She had been blindsided, yes, but now she knew exactly what to do. As she gathered the credit card statements, flight bookings, and burner phone, Lena knew that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. She wasn't going to be the victim anymore. She wasn't going to be the boring wife who got left behind on her 40th birthday. She was going to take back everything Caleb had stolen from her. With a deep breath, Lena stood up and walked out of the office, a new sense of purpose filling her steps. She had a plan now, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone stand in her way. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for it. Because now, she wasn't just fighting for her family. She was fighting for herself. And that, she realized, was all she needed to move forward. Lena sat in her office, her fingers poised over the keyboard. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. But in that moment, the darkness felt different. It wasn't the same oppressive weight of loneliness and despair she had felt earlier in the day. Now, it was a quiet kind of power, the kind that comes when someone finally takes control of their own narrative. She had spent hours searching for the truth, piecing together the lies that had been spun over the years. But now, with every piece of evidence she had gathered, Lena felt a sense of clarity. She was no longer the victim in her own story. The betrayal she had uncovered was not just a personal blow, it was a violation of trust, of everything she had worked for, and everything she had built with Caleb. But instead of succumbing to the anger and heartbreak that would have been so easy to embrace, Lena had a different approach in mind. She wasn't going to fall apart. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She had a plan, and this time, it was her turn to control the narrative. Her thoughts turned to Marcus Johnson, the head of security at Caleb's company. She had reached out to him earlier in the day, tapping into a network of people she had helped over the years, people who owed her favors and were now willing to repay them. Marcus had been one of the people she trusted, someone she had worked with in the past, someone who had always respected her professionalism. She had asked him for help, explaining that she needed access to some security footage that would expose Caleb's affair and the financial misconduct he had been hiding. She wasn't sure how far Caleb had gone to cover his tracks, but she knew that Marcus's expertise could help her dig deeper into Caleb's lies. As the minutes ticked by, Lena reflected on the time she had spent building this moment. She had spent years deflecting Caleb's criticisms, diminishing herself to fit into the role he had created for her. She had been the supportive wife, the one who always put his needs before her own, the one who didn't question, who didn't rock the boat. But that woman was gone now. The woman sitting in this room, staring at the phone in front of her, was someone different. This was a woman who had taken the time to understand what she wanted, who had peeled back the layers of deception and seen the truth for what it was. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to cry. She was going to expose the truth, and in doing so, she would reclaim the power that had been stripped from her. Lena's phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She looked down and saw a message from Marcus. The secure link to Caleb's office footage had been sent. The moment she'd been waiting for had arrived. She opened the link, her pulse quickening as the footage loaded. She didn't need to watch it all. She had already seen enough to know that this was at the smoking gun, the undeniable proof that Caleb had been leading a double life. The footage was time-stamped, capturing Caleb's late nights at the office, his meetings with Vanessa, and most damning of all, their intimate interactions in his office. It was clear that this wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a carefully orchestrated affair that Caleb had been hiding for months. Lena's stomach twisted as she watched them, her husband and his secretary, betraying the trust she had placed in him. But even as the images on the screen burned through her, Lena's mind stayed sharp. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. She took a deep breath and closed the link. She didn't need to see more. She had everything she needed. She knew exactly how to proceed. Lena picked up her phone again, and this time, she dialed Richard Barnes, the managing partner at Caleb's firm. She had been preparing for this moment ever since she discovered the affair. She had already drafted the email, carefully outlining the evidence she had gathered and the company policies that had been violated. She had done her homework, and she knew exactly where to aim. Caleb had always prided himself on his position at the company, on his power and influence. But now it was all slipping away from him. The company he had worked so hard to build his career around, the one he had used to justify his behavior, was about to become his undoing. With calm determination, Lena composed the email, attaching the footage and documents she had collected. There was no emotional language, no accusations, just the facts. The cold, hard evidence. She wrote about the affair, the misuse of company resources, and the violations of the executive conduct policy that Caleb had clearly ignored. She made it clear that she was bringing this to their attention not out of spite, but because it was the right thing to do. She had spent years watching Caleb hide behind his charm, manipulating everyone around him. But now, he had to face the consequences of his actions, and Lena was going to make sure of it. As she clicked send, Lena's heart raced, but it wasn't from fear. It was from a strange sense of empowerment. She wasn't just an angry wife anymore. She wasn't just a victim. She was a woman who had taken control of her own fate. She had exposed Caleb for who he truly was, and she had done it on her own terms. There was no turning back now. The next step was confronting Caleb. She knew that once he received the email, his world would come crashing down. She wasn't sure how he would react, but she knew that this time she would stand firm. She wouldn't let him manipulate her any longer. She had already made arrangements for their divorce, had contacted an attorney, and had begun the process of moving on with her life. This marriage was over, and she was finally free. Lena sat back at her chair, taking a moment to process everything that had happened. She had done it. She had exposed the truth. And now, it was time to move forward. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Lena felt a sense of peace. She was no longer bound by the lies. She was no longer controlled by Caleb. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be hers. And for the first time in years, Lena felt a sense of liberation. She had taken back her power, and nothing at all could take that away from her. Lena felt a quiet surge of power as she walked back into the dining room, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. The candles flickered softly, casting long shadows across the table, which was set meticulously for an evening that was supposed to celebrate 5 years of marriage. Her husband, Eric, sat across from her, wearing a forced smile that had become all too familiar over the past few months. His parents, ever so kind, chatted amicably with him, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. They seemed so eager to believe the best in him, their golden boy. But tonight, Lena was about to show them the man she had come to know, the man she had spent years supporting and loving, only to have him betray her and their family in the most gut-wrenching way possible. As she moved to the counter to pour herself a glass of water, Lena kept her composure, feeling the calmness of resolve settle over her. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. There was no need for loud confrontations or drama. No, Lena had learned better. She knew exactly how to handle this moment. She had been planning it for days, gathering the evidence, building her case, and preparing herself for the undeniable truth that would soon unfold. Her fingers brushed against the phone that sat in her pocket, the device that held the video, her secret weapon. It was time. It was time for Eric to see the consequences of his actions, not just through words, but through irrefutable, cold, and hard evidence. The tension in the room was palpable as she sat down at the table again, her parents-in-law still chatting about neighborhood gossip and new recipes they had been trying. Eric was distracted, checking his phone repeatedly, clearly avoiding eye contact with Lena. His mind, no doubt, was racing. He had no idea what she had been up to. No idea that the calm facade she had maintained over the last few months had been nothing more than a mask, a carefully constructed wall behind which she had been quietly planning her retribution. Lena exchanged a glance with his parents, a brief, knowing look, as she reached for her phone. This was it. She had waited long enough. With a steady hand, Lena opened the video, her thumb hovering for just a second over the play button. She had seen it all before. The footage of Eric and his assistant, Vanessa, in their secretive, stolen moments. She had watched it dozens of times, feeling a quiet sense of vindication with each viewing. But now, it was time to make Eric watch it too. It was time for him to face the full extent of what he had done. With a slow exhale, she pressed play. The room fell silent as the video began to play on the television. The image of Eric and Vanessa walking into his office, laughing together, their body language all too familiar. Lena watched as his parents, still unaware, turned their attention to the screen, their expressions curious. But as the video progressed, their faces shifted first to confusion, then to shock, and finally to horror. Lena could feel the shift in the air as the truth settled in. This wasn't the charming, hard-working man they had raised. This was a man who had betrayed his wife, his family, and their trust for months on end. As the video continued, capturing more intimate moments between Eric and Vanessa, Lena could feel her heart race with quiet satisfaction. This was justice, served on her own terms. There was no yelling, no confrontation, just the truth laid bare. Eric, who had been fidgeting with his napkin, froze as he realized what was happening. His face drained of color, his mouth going dry as his parents looked at him, their eyes wide with disbelief. The video, with its timestamps and clear footage, left no room for denial. It was his voice, his body language, his betrayal. All of it was there, plain and clear. Lena glanced at his parents as they looked at Eric, the shock registering slowly, and for the first time, she saw them begin to understand. They didn't know the full extent of his actions, of how he had used his power, his position, to manipulate and deceive. Now they knew. The tension in the room reached a boiling point as Eric stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor with an audible screech. He looked at Lena, his face twisted in a mixture of panic and guilt. "This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his voice shaking. But Lena didn't flinch. She sat there, composed, watching as the man she had once trusted tried to find a way out of the situation. The guilt was written all over his face, but so was the desperation, the desperate need to salvage his reputation, to explain away his actions, to manipulate everyone around him as he had done so many times before. But not this time. This time, there would be no explanation. This time, Lena wasn't backing down. Eric's parents were silent, their faces betraying the hurt and disappointment they were feeling. His mother, who had always adored him, looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. She reached out to touch his arm, but Eric jerked away, his frustration boiling over. His father, Easton, who had always been the pillar of strength and authority, stood up and stepped forward. His eyes locked with Eric's, filled with fury. "What have you done, son?" Easton's voice was low, controlled, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of disappointment. His slap across Eric's face was like a physical manifestation of the years of lies and betrayals that had finally come to a head. The sound of it echoed through the room, silencing the chaos that had been unfolding. Lena watched, her heart pounding, but she felt no satisfaction in the slap. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at Eric for what he had done to her. It was about something deeper, something more profound. It was about truth. It was about justice. And above all, it was about reclaiming her power, the power that had been taken from her for so many years. She had spent years in this marriage, suppressing her own needs, her own desires, in favor of Eric's career, his success, his happiness. But now, she was taking back everything she had lost. The room was still and heavy as Eric stood there, his face red and eyes brimming with tears, but his pride would not allow him to break. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Lena raised her hand, silencing him. "I don't need your words, Eric," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You've already shown me who you are, and now your actions have consequences." His parents, still reeling from the shock, began to stir. Easton looked at Lena, his expression shifting from rage to something softer, something more understanding. "What do you want, Michaela?" he asked, his voice tinged with both sorrow and respect. "I want him to face what he's done," Lena replied, standing up slowly. "I want him to understand the damage he's caused, and I want him to know that there will be no easy way out. No more lies, no more excuses, just the truth." Eric's face contorted as the reality of his situation set in. There was no escape, no way to talk his way out of this one. And Lena, for the first time in years, felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had done what she needed to do. She had exposed the truth, not just to Eric, but to the people who had been complicit in his lies. And now, she could finally move forward. The dinner, which had once been meant to celebrate their marriage, now felt like a distant memory. There would be no more pretending, no more smiles behind closed doors. From that moment on, Lena knew that her life would never be the same. And for the first time in a long time, that was exactly what she wanted. As Lena sat in the quiet of her home, a strange sense of peace washed over her. The events of the past few days had been a whirlwind, painful, revealing, and deeply unsettling. But amid the emotional chaos, there was a flicker of relief, a moment of clarity she hadn't felt in years. Eric's life was unraveling, and with it, the facade of the perfect marriage they had once presented to the world. His career was crumbling under the weight of the scandal, his colleagues and clients turning their backs on him as quickly as the truth had come to light. His personal life, once meticulously curated to maintain a sense of control and respectability, had become a shattered mess. The woman he had been secretly involved with, Vanessa, had quietly disappeared from his life, as had the extravagant lifestyle they had built together. For Lena, this unraveling of Eric's carefully constructed world was a bittersweet victory. She had never expected things to go this far, but in some way, she had always known that the lies and deception would eventually catch up with him. And now, as the pieces of his life scattered in every direction, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of liberation. The weight of emotional manipulation that had loomed over her for so long was slowly lifting, and for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. It was as if a heavy burden had been placed on her shoulders for so long, and now it had finally been taken away. There was sadness, of course, a deep, lingering sadness that settled in the pit of her stomach whenever she allowed herself to truly feel the loss. The betrayal she had experienced, the broken trust, the years of emotional abuse, these things could not be erased with the mere revelation of Eric's deceit. They would stay with her, haunting her in quiet moments when she allowed herself to reflect on the woman she had been before all of this began. The woman who had poured every ounce of herself into a marriage she thought would last forever. The woman who had neglected her own desires, her own happiness, in favor of supporting her husband's career, his ambitions, and his dreams. But even with the sadness, there was a powerful sense of freedom that had begun to take root within her. For so long, Lena had been controlled by Eric's manipulations, his criticisms, and his insidious undermining of her self-worth. He had made her believe that her needs didn't matter, that her opinions were insignificant, and that the life they had built together was somehow less important than his own desires. He had isolated her from her friends, from her family, and from herself, convincing her that she was too busy, too tired, and too consumed with their life together to pursue her own passions. And yet, now that the truth was out, Lena realized just how much of herself she had lost in that relationship. She had become a shell of the woman she once was, a woman full of dreams, ambitions, and desires that were suppressed under the weight of Eric's control. But in the aftermath of his betrayal, Lena felt herself starting to emerge from that shell. She felt the stirring of her old self, the woman who had once been independent, confident, and unafraid to take risks. She began to rediscover her passions, one small step at a time. It started with little things like picking up a book she had always wanted to read or signing up for a yoga class she had been too busy to attend. The relief Lena felt was not just from the exposure of Eric's wrongdoings, but from the realization that she was no longer bound by the emotional shackles he had placed on her. She was free. She could make her own choices now, live her life on her own terms. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was living in the shadow of someone else's expectations. The overwhelming sadness that had plagued her for so long was still there, but it was accompanied by a newfound sense of power. She had taken control of her life, and she had done so with strength and courage. In the weeks that followed, Lena began to rebuild her life. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the weight of the betrayal felt unbearable. There were days when the sadness crept in, and she found herself grieving not just the loss of her marriage, but the loss of herself. But with every passing day, she grew stronger. She found comfort in the small victories, like being able to sleep through the night without the nagging fear of what Eric was doing behind her back, or the way her children began to see her not just as their mother, but as an individual, a woman who was capable of standing up for herself, even when it seemed impossible. Lena's journey toward healing was not a linear one. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of everything she had been through seemed too heavy to bear. But each time she felt herself slipping, she reminded herself that she had already taken the hardest step. She had faced the truth, no matter how painful it was, and she had emerged on the other side stronger than before. The anger she once felt toward Eric began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of clarity. She no longer needed his approval, his validation, or his love. She had learned to love herself again, to value herself in a way that she had never done before. As the months passed, Lena found herself reclaiming her life in ways she hadn't imagined. She reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and rediscovered her love for her career. She realized that she had spent so many years living for Eric, living for the family, living for everyone else, that she had neglected the most important person in her life, herself. Now, as she stood on the other side of this painful chapter, she knew that she had the power to shape her own future, to create a life that was truly hers, free from the manipulation and control that had once defined her existence. The sadness of the betrayal would always be a part of her, but it no longer had the power to define her. She had taken her life back, piece by piece, and with that came a sense of freedom she had never known before. The truth had set her free, not just from Eric, but from the lies she had told herself for years. And as she looked forward to the future, Lena felt a deep sense of gratitude for the strength she had found within herself. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was a life that was hers to create. And that, in itself, was a gift. Lena's life, once dominated by the emotional weight of betrayal and heartache, had finally begun to shift in a direction she never thought possible. For the first time in years, she was no longer tethered to the painful echoes of her marriage to Eric. After the exposure of his affair, his financial misconduct, and the deliberate abandonment of her, Lena was left with a daunting void to fill. But in that emptiness, she found a strange kind of freedom that came with both fear and excitement, as she began the slow and steady process of rebuilding her life from the ground up. The first step was recognizing that she was no longer the woman she had once been, the one who had put everyone else's needs above her own. She had spent so many years sacrificing her own dreams and desires for the sake of her family, that somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of who she truly was. Lena realized that the person she was before her marriage, before motherhood, before all the compromises, was still in there waiting to emerge. And that was exactly what she began to do. Her first act of reclamation was simple, yet profoundly impactful. Lena started focusing on herself again. After years of being consumed by the needs of others, her husband's career, the children's needs, the demands of their home, she made a conscious decision to prioritize her own happiness. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when guilt would creep in, especially as a mother. But slowly, Lena began to understand that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was essential. She was allowed to live a life that was about more than just being a wife or a mother. One of the first things Lena did was reconnect with the hobbies she had set aside for years. As a young woman, she had always loved painting, but somewhere along the way, the paints and brushes had been put away, buried under the weight of life's demands. Now, with time on her hands and the need to find healing in creative expression, Lena picked up the brushes again. She had forgotten how liberating it felt to lose herself in the colors and the strokes, to create something purely for herself. Each canvas she painted became a symbol of her personal growth, a reminder that she was still capable of beauty, of creating something meaningful, even after everything she had been through. Alongside her rediscovery of painting, Lena began to reconnect with friends she had distanced herself from over the years. When she was married to Eric, her social life had revolved around him. The couple's friends, his colleagues, and the social obligations of their marriage had slowly pushed her own friendships to the background. But now, as she stood at the crossroads of her new life, she reached out to those she had once loved spending time with. There were awkward moments at first, as she navigated the changes in her relationships. But soon she found herself surrounded by a supportive network of women who had known her before the trauma, who saw her not just as a wife or a mother, but as a strong, capable individual with her own identity and her own voice. The laughter she shared with these friends was different now. It wasn't just the laughter of someone trying to hold everything together for the sake of their family. It was the kind of laughter that came from a place of true joy, from moments of pure connection. For the first time in years, Lena was able to let go of the constant worry, the fear of not being enough, and simply enjoy the company of those who cared for her. Each outing, each shared conversation, reinforced her sense of self, reminded her that she was more than just a role she played for others. With time, Lena also began to focus on her physical health. After years of putting everyone else's needs first, she had allowed her own health to slip into the background. Her energy had been drained by the emotional toll of her marriage, leaving her feeling fatigued and disconnected from her body. But as the weeks passed, Lena began to make small, deliberate changes. She joined a yoga class, something she had always wanted to try, but never had the time for. The gentle stretches and mindful breathing were a perfect way for her to reconnect with her body, to release the physical tension that had built up over the years. It wasn't just about losing weight or looking a certain way, it was about feeling strong, feeling empowered, and feeling good in her own skin again. Lena also began taking trips, small weekend getaways to places she had always dreamed of visiting but had never had the time for. She went hiking in the mountains where the fresh air and the solitude allowed her to reflect on her journey. She traveled to the beach, walking barefoot in the sand, feeling the healing power of the ocean wash over her. These trips weren't just about escape. They were about rediscovering herself, about building new memories that weren't clouded by the past. As the months went by, Lena found that the sadness she had carried for so long was starting to lift. It didn't disappear overnight. Grief, after all, is never that simple. There were still days when the betrayal would catch her off guard, moments when the weight of the past would come rushing back. But there were fewer of those days now, and the time between them grew longer. Lena had begun to reclaim her life in a way she had never thought possible. She was no longer the woman who defined herself through her marriage, through her family, or through the role she had been expected to play. She was Lena whole, independent, and strong. The emotional journey she had undergone was one of profound healing and self-discovery. It wasn't just about moving on from the pain of the past. It was about building something new, something better. Lena found pride in the way she had handled her divorce, in the way she had taken control of her own future. She no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance. She saw herself as a survivor, someone who had the strength to overcome even the darkest of times. With each passing day, Lena's confidence grew. She began to trust herself again, to believe in her own worth. She took pride in the fact that she was able to rebuild her life from the ruins of her marriage. She had come to realize that her worth was never tied to Eric's actions, that her identity was never defined by the role she had played in their marriage. As Lena continued on her journey of healing, she began to see the world around her with fresh eyes. The scars from her past were still there, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they serve as a reminder of her strength, of her resilience, and of the incredible woman she had always been. The future, once filled with uncertainty and fear, now felt full of possibility. And Lena knew that, no matter what came next, she had the power to create the life she deserved. Lena's 41st birthday marked the true beginning of her new life, a life defined not by the betrayals of her past, but by the love and strength she had rediscovered within herself. As she sat surrounded by the warmth of her children, friends, and family, the weight of everything she had gone through seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace and empowerment. The house, once a silent witness to her heartache, was now filled with laughter, love, and the comforting presence of those who genuinely cared for her. The transformation that had begun on her 40th birthday, when the truth of her husband's infidelity and lies had shattered her world, had slowly unfurled into something unexpectedly beautiful. Reflecting on the journey she had undertaken, Lena realized how far she had come in just a year. Her 40th birthday, the day when she had been cruelly abandoned and left to face the painful truth of her marriage, had started as a day of deep sorrow and confusion. It had been a day when her world felt like it was crumbling beneath her feet, when the love and trust she had placed in her husband had been brutally torn away. But in the wake of that betrayal, Lena had found herself, and more importantly, she had found the courage to rebuild her life. The moment of truth, painful as it was, had been a gift, a catalyst that had forced her to confront not just her marriage, but also the patterns she had unconsciously built her life around. She had been living for others, constantly sacrificing her own needs and desires for the sake of a family dynamic that was not as it seemed. As Lena stood in the kitchen that morning, surrounded by her children and friends, the realization washed over her that this was the life she had always deserved. The love and support she now felt from those around her were not the result of pretending to be something she wasn't, but rather from embracing the woman she truly was: strong, capable, and unafraid to stand up for herself. Her children, once confused and caught in the middle of the painful collapse of her marriage, had become her greatest source of strength. Emma and Jake had watched their mother not only survive the devastation of her marriage, but thrive in the aftermath. They had seen her reclaim her life, piece by piece, and in doing so, they had learned from her example the power of resilience and the importance of self-love. The house, which had once felt like a prison, was now a sanctuary. Lena had reclaimed every corner of it, filling it with memories that were no longer tainted by betrayal. The family portraits on the walls no longer mocked her. Instead, they serve as reminders of her strength and the courage it had taken to move forward. The garden outside, which she had lovingly tended in the months after the divorce, was in full bloom, much like her life. She had planted seeds of hope, of change, and now they were flourishing, a testament to her ability to nurture and create beauty even in the most challenging of circumstances. Her friends, who had watched from the sidelines as she navigated the painful realities of her marriage and divorce, were now her support system in ways they had never been before. They celebrated her, not as the wife of Caleb Harrington, but as Lena, the strong, independent woman who had found her voice again. They had witnessed the transformation she had undergone, and in their eyes, she was more than just a survivor. She was a beacon of strength and inspiration. These friendships, once strained by the emotional manipulation and isolation she had endured, had blossomed anew, forged in the fires of her pain and triumph. Lena's children had also grown in unexpected ways. Emma, once a teenage girl caught in the throes of her father's manipulation, now stood beside her mother as a young woman who understood the complexities of love, loyalty, and independence. Jake, who had once been a boy desperate for his parents' approval, had learned that true strength didn't come from seeking validation from others, but from within. Both of them had learned, through Lena's actions, that love was not something that should ever come at the expense of one's self-worth. They had watched her build a life that was hers alone, one that wasn't defined by the man who had once promised to love her forever. As Lena reflected on the events of the past year, she marveled at how much she had accomplished. She had taken control of her life, her career, and her happiness in ways that she had never thought possible. The sense of freedom she now felt was not just from the physical constraints of her marriage, but from the emotional and mental weight that had held her captive for so long. She no longer feared being alone or unloved. Instead, she reveled in the quiet solitude that allowed her to reconnect with her passions, her creativity, and her sense of self. The journey had not been without its challenges. There were days when the weight of the betrayal still hung heavy on her heart, and there were moments when she found herself wondering what could have been had things turned out differently. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of peace and empowerment that now filled her life. She had learned that healing was not linear, that some days would be harder than others, but that each day brought her closer to the woman she was meant to be. The sadness of the betrayal, while still present, no longer defined her. It was a chapter in her story, not the entire narrative. And as Lena stood in her kitchen on her 41st birthday, surrounded by love, laughter, and a sense of belonging, she felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the painful gift of truth that had set her free. It had been the catalyst for her transformation, the turning point that had allowed her to take control of her destiny and rebuild her life on her own terms. She had faced her darkest fears, confronted her deepest insecurities, and emerged stronger than ever. And now, as she looked forward to the future, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength and resilience to face them head-on. For the first time in years, Lena was no longer defined by the man she had once loved or the marriage that had crumbled under the weight of betrayal. She was defined by her own strength, her own journey, and the love and support of those who truly mattered. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. The story of Lena teaches us several profound lessons, especially relevant to older adults who may have experienced long-term relationships or marriages. One important takeaway is the power of self-worth and the importance of setting boundaries. Throughout her marriage, Lena had sacrificed her own needs and aspirations for the sake of her family and her husband. However, when faced with betrayal, she learned to reclaim her independence and take control of her own happiness. This shows that no matter how deeply we invest in relationships, our self-respect and personal growth must always come first. Another crucial lesson is that it's never too late to start anew. Despite the emotional turmoil and the devastation of discovering her husband's betrayal, Lena found the strength to rebuild her life. She reconnected with friends, rediscovered her passions, and began living authentically. This journey of self-healing and empowerment is a reminder that no matter our age, we are always capable of transformation. Lastly, Lena's story illustrates the importance of inner strength in the face of adversity. It encourages us to face challenges with resilience, to trust our instincts, and to believe that we have the ability to navigate through life's most difficult moments. For older adults, this is a powerful reminder that they're never too old to find peace, reclaim their power, and move forward with confidence. Thank you for watching. If you found this video eye-opening and intriguing, please leave a like and subscribe to Stories TH for more amazing content. Your feedback means the world to us, and we're so glad to have you as part of our community.